So we're gonna focus on Hendricksons tonight. Part of the reason being, I was gonna do like a little bit of more like a dry dropper series, but honestly, the more I thought about it, I was just like, man, I'm kind of just like really excited about the opening day hatches right now. The one we'll start with today is a sort of a, an emerger tied on a scud hook with a tilt wing. It's the one that's in the vise right now, actually. And this one's just kind of special to me. I'll be completely transparent and say that I did not like design this, create this. It was sort of a old remnant fly that was in the bins at Gates Lodge. And, Steve Pels, before he passed away, he would always get me in the parking lot or text me, hey, Lancey, you got any more of those in your box? That fly's been smoking him. You got any more?
That's awesome.
I just had this memory of this fly, like, this winter, and I was like, I gotta start fishing that thing again. And I kind of deleted a few things from it. Really what it was is a Hendrickson missing link. When I would tie him, I would just delete the underwing, for a lack of a better term. It fished fine, but if you wanted to tie it with a missing link, EP wing under the hackle, you certainly could. But regardless of that, it's just a fun fly, and it reminds me of a really good friend of mine that I miss every day.
Yeah, it's too bad.
Yeah, but
Steve's a great guy.
We're gonna tie this one for Steve. Like I mentioned, if I don't know if you've got the camera on it, but you can see here we're gonna tie on a scud hook. This particular hook happens to be a Daiichi 1120 size 14. Oh, Stormy's got. Daiichi 1120 size 14, which is just a scud hook. You could tie this on a TMC 2488. That would be a great hook. If you're a fan of the barbless, you could certainly put it on a FM 5065 Fulling Mill scud hook as well. Those are three great hook options. I tend to like the 1120 because it's 2x heavy. So if I find myself in, let's say, lower density systems where Hendricksons are, prevalent, I do kind of trust a little heavier hook, for the larger fish in them lower density waters. So, if you're fishing, below any of the major dams, maybe, on the Asabo River, for instance, this is a great hook. I trust this hook on big browns. So, the first thing you kind of notice here is how I'm kind of putting my, my hook here in the vise. Traditionally, we'd put a hook, in the vise like so, but we're going to kind of tilt this down on a 45-degree angle. The reason I'm going to do that is because I'm going to add a trailing shuck, and it's going to be a lot easier to add my trailing shuck with the hook turned in the vise this way as opposed to flat. So we will eventually, switch that out. But we're going to go ahead and just kind of carefully and neatly start our thread up at our eye and wrap it back. I got a little shop doggy walking around here.
Yeah, sorry about that.
Oh, no, it's
she's
fine.
Starting to pace.
It is fine. So, yeah, and what I'm doing here, this is a tan 6/0 thread, and I'm roughly wrapping that, about midway back into the bend, okay? And I'm going to go ahead here, and I'm just going to grab a little bit of my Montana Fly Company Z yarn, which is a brown Z-Lon. And we're going to use this as our trailing shuck for this dry fly. So this is going to be a nymphal trailing shuck. As I previously spoke, this is an emerger pattern. The rear end of this fly is going to sit sit below the film of the water here. We're going to ask this Z-Lon here to kind of represent the trailing nymphal shuck, as the bug itself emerges and breaks through the meniscus of the water. You don't have to necessarily use Z-Lon if you were to tie something like this at home. There's a lot of great products out there, Darlon, Sparkle Emerger yarn, stuff like that.
Even an Antron, you could probably
use. Antron, absolutely. Corded Antron.
Anything with great on or lawn at the end is
probably
it's
got an LON.
Yeah, it's probably ideal for that.
Yeah, any of the lawns.
Yeah,
any of the lawns. One thing I will kind of say before, I kind of dig in here too, when I fish specific little emerger flies like this, I'm kind of particular about how I dress them, so to speak. So, if we were to, think about this nymphal shuck here, a lot of, we see a lot of floatants on the market today, such as Shimazaki liquid or Loon fly dip, Flyagra, stuff like that. This wouldn't be a fly that I would particularly dunk, 100% of the fly in a liquid floating like this. I'm going to potentially, when I go to fish this, actually wet the shuck in my mouth and just kind of add a little bit of moisture to that, and then apply, my Loxa, my Gink, or my Aquel to the Tilt Wing and the Hackle. That way, when I have an angler cast this, or I myself cast this, I know that the ass end of this fly is going to sink, right through the film of the water and kind of land as it's intended to. So,
that's a really good pro tip, because that's the whole idea why you're tying it on that scud style hook.
Yep.
So that hangs down.
Yep,
right?
exactly.
I mean, and I think a lot of people don't think about their flies when they purchase them, or they're, those emergers especially. You want those hanging as far down in that film as you can.
Exactly. And if you go out and you cast that 4 feet above a rising fish, and that fly sinks 6 inches in front of the nose of that fish, that fly's not doing its job. As soon as that fly hits the water, it should be, pushing through the film of that water, and selling, the profile that we're looking for, more or less.
Absolutely. Great pro tip. Thank you.
Yep. So nothing too crazy here. We're just going to add, a trailing shuck here, and kind of where, I ended my thread there. I'm just going to, go ahead and affix that Z-line. And I'm just going to start to wrap up the shank of the hook. And part of the reason I'm doing this is just to kind of help build me a little bit of taper to this, because we're going to ask the thread to be the body of our dry fly. So that's the other nice thing about this. It's just kind of a simple, cheap, guide fly, easy peasy on the wallet. So I'm just going to go through here before I do any cleanup work on my Z-line here. I'm just going to go through and kind of start to loosely and lightly create a mayfly taper, being such that the mid portion, the top 1/3 portion is slightly thicker than the rear end of the hook. So as you can kind of see here, I have my, thread, and I'm just kind of looking at it, making sure I've got a realistic looking profile going on. And once I kind of start to believe in what I'm looking at here, if it's selling it and it's looking real, I'll just go ahead and I'll end my thread, right down at the antron butts here. So next thing we got to do, we're not going to fish a trailing shuck that long. I usually like to take my scissors here, and I'll go in and I'll just kind of create, the measurement of basically the, from the base of the hook eye to where I ended my thread, and roughly carry that over to my antron and clip my shuck. Another way, before I do that, I actually just did a tying class a month ago, and a guy named Steve was doing the tying class, and he actually liked to bring his antron up to the eye and clip it that way. I thought that was pretty neat. It's not the way I do it, but I thought that was pretty slick. But yeah, I'm just going to go ahead and get my measurement point there, and I'm going to clip my trailing shuck roughly my hook shank in length. So we're not going to kind of end it there. This isn't a true rotary vise, so it may be kind of hard to tell. I'll kind of rotate it as best I can, if the camera can see that. But you can kind of see from my antron there, I've made that blunt cut, and it's sort of, a very sort of rectangular, blocky, structure. We're going to go here, and we're actually just going to now sort of cut a little bit of a taper into our trailing shuck. So basically I'm taking my scissors here and making sort of a triangular cut, so to speak, on the rear part of the fly, or the rear part of the trailing shuck here, just to kind of trim a little bit of the fat and, take a little bit of the blockiness, because, a mayfly nymph, if this was the head of the mayfly nymph's trailing shuck, it's going to be a little bit thicker, off the rear. It's going to be a little bit skinnier in back. So I'm just going to go through and just kind of do a little cleanup. Okay. Awesome. I'm feeling pretty good about that. You can kind of see what we got there. Now, this is probably a step you could choose to omit, certainly. I'm going to add a little bling to it. This is just some crystal flash. We're going to sort of, do some spiraling wraps up the hook shank itself and just give the fly a little bit of bling. This is just a crystal flash. I'm doing this in a fluorescent shrimp pink. Certainly, you know, any color you got that's close to that would be fine. The original pattern that I tying this off of, I believe, had like a red crystal flash, which I kind of thought was pretty smart. You know, the male Hendricksons tend to have a little bit more of a reddish quality to their body, whereas the females sort of have more of a honeyish dun quality to their body. So that's what's kind of neat about Hendricksons. You know, the male's a little darker than the female. And that's, you know, we're really getting into, you know, technicality and certain things that might not matter. But if you're a bug person, you know, those are fun little subtleties to it.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, but yeah, I'm just going to go ahead. I failed to get my crystal flash out of the package here. So
we get some ASMR.
What's that?
So we get some ASMR.
Yeah, right. Can you hear that? The crinkle flash. Cool. So I'm just going to go ahead and just cut a one piece off the hank here. You know, those of you that tie, purple Patriots and red Patriots, you know, you probably have some of that smoke blue crystal flash laying around. You know, that would probably be just fine as well. This is just going to blend pretty well into the body here. So from the rear end here, I'm going to go ahead on the hook shank nearest to me. I'm just going to capture the butt ends of my crystal flash here and kind of seal the deal. Fix that to the body of my dry fly. And this is, you know, this is where you kind of want to start doing your double check. Make sure you've got, you know, a profile that you're confident in right now. So you just see, I'm just kind of smoothing out some rough patches. All right, awesome. So I've got my crystal flash in. It's time to flip the hook itself in the vise back to a normal position. So what you can see my bobbin here, how I have a little bit of thread out. I'm actually going to suck that thread right into the bottom of the dry fly here, okay, rather than do a whip finish or a half hitch. And then I'm just going to grab the top portion of the hook shank and just begin to flip my hook in the vise like so. So you can see we're kind of straightened out here now. All right. So at this point, I'm going to grab my crystal flash here and just neatly wrap this up the hook shank. And I'm just doing these, you know, not touching wraps here. I'm just kind of spacing these wraps out. Just giving a little bit of bling, a little bit of life, a little bit of razzle dazzle, something to kind of stick out amongst all the, you know, the naturals that might be hatching if you're in a, you know, a big super hatch of Hendrickson somewhere. You know, and that's roughly 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 or 6 wraps. I'm going to go ahead and make a couple wraps over the top of that, 2 wraps beneath it, and get rid of my my pink crystal flash there. So you can see this is the body we have right now. So, you know, kind of skinny down on the bottom end, and we start to, you know, slightly taper up into a realistic, you know, realistic profile of a Hendrickson as we get towards the top portion of the hook shank there. All right. So this is kind of where the fun happens. So, you know, what I'm going to choose to do here today is I'm going to choose to tilt the wing on my parachute, to kind of give it more of a, you know, 45-degree laid back wing. This is how, you know, your missing links, you know, your McCoys, cherry bombs and stuff like that are tied. And part of the reason I thought this was kind of fun to do is I think I made the comment last year how I don't fish a lot of tilt wings in the month of May. That was a lie. The more I thought about it, I actually do. And, you know, kind of just forgot about this. But anyway, we're gonna do. I tuned in last week and I watched Ed tie his, you know, his tilt wing, which was great. Awesome dude, awesome tire, great friend, and but we're gonna do it a little different than he does. I find it really interesting how he sets his wing. It's not a way that I've ever seen it done before. So we'll do it a little slightly different to him, but it's really cool how he sets his wing. I really like it. So we're going to start adding a little bit of dubbing for the thorax. You know, there are a lot of there is one particular Hendrickson dubbing on the market, which I'm sure we've all seen, which is the Hairline Hendrickson Pink. I hate that thing. You know, it's so cotton candy that it's almost unrealistic. I choose to use a calabatus microfine dubbing or superfine dubbing from Hairline. It seems to kind of hit the hue a little bit more on the head. So that's kind of the dubbing that I may suggest. Hairline Tan's really good. Nature's Spirit has a calabatus dubbing too that's quite nice, but you know, this calabatus dry fly dub from Hairline, kind of, you know, kind of cream of the crop in terms of the hue in my mind. So we'll go ahead and just grab a small wisp of that. You know, as you know, some of you may know, less is more when it comes to dubbing. You know, specifically with the microfines and the superfines, because this stuff's really difficult to remove from our thread. So we're gonna just kind of grab little small wisps of this and just dub it on ever so slightly, so that we are not over bulking the thorax, because we don't want, you know, we don't want a mega thorax here. And this roughly is going to become, I would say, oh, 1.5 to 2-inch dubbing noodle or so. I'm going to go ahead and I'm just going to start wrapping, you know, that dubbing noodle roughly, I would say, halfway up to the hook eye. Okay, so you can see I kind of stopped there, and I've placed my thread in the middle of that little dubbing ball there. Okay, we will add more dubbing to kind of fill in any gaps, you know, that we may have with our 45-degree tilt wing here, but we'll get there. So if you chose to tie this and you weren't too keen, or maybe you're a newer tyer, you know, you could certainly use like a parapost wing and maybe just tie, you know, a standard parachute wing, but we'll sex it up here a little bit. We're going to use a short fine deer hair for our wing here. I'm choosing today to tie with a light dun short fine deer hair. I brought a couple other deer hairs with me to kind of give tyers an idea. Because I know that the stuff that I brought is kind of a little more specialty from Josh Varner. This is kind of a deer hair guy out in Montana that I've started to get pretty into. He has pretty good quality, but hairline, gray, you know, gray dyed deer hair would be fine. And the reason we like that gray is because, you know, that Hendrickson has a really dark dun wing. So just adds a little bit of more realism to the dry fly itself. So you're done. Our gray hair from Hairline is a great tool for you if that's what the local fly shop is selling. Or if you are at a place like the Northern Angler, who has a Nature's Spirit account, you know, your AP, your all-purpose natural whitetail deer body is also a really great option. Part of the reason why I like, you know, sort of the, sort of higher quality, softer, hollower deer hair for setting this wing is it's a lot easier to affix this to the hook with your, you know, your thinner threads like the 6/0 and the 8/0. Did I kick the camera?
No, you didn't.
Okay, cool. So anyway, we're going to go ahead and we're going to select a little bit of this short fine light dun deer hair from the hide here. So this is always funny. If you watch fly tying videos, you notice how there's like a universal tying measurement for deer hair. It's always a pencil's width.
Right.
You notice that?
A number 2 pencil.
Number 2 pencil's width. You know, you might, you know, if you're tying something like this at home, you're probably, oh gosh, half of a pencil's width here. Let's go with half of a pencil's width. I'm going to go ahead and we're just going to clip that deer hair as close to the hide as possible. You know, when selecting a deer hair for, you know, any of your deer hair bodied mayflies, wings, that sort of stuff, you know, we're going to want to try and find something with as little underfur as possible. And, you know, all deer hair is going to have a little bit of underfur. But, you know, you can kind of see I'm using my thumb and my forefinger here to kind of preen through. And I'm using my index finger to kind of whack it back and forth. And I'm just doing that to simply get rid of the underfur, maybe any broken tips that might be in there. All right. And then we're going to go ahead and we're going to place that into our hair stacker here. Okay, once it's in our hair stacker here, we're going to get it a few pops. 4 or 5 pops firmly, and then 3 or 4 pops softly on the table should stack that sufficiently.
You were very specific last year.
Yeah.
You said 3 hard taps, 3 soft taps.
Was I?
I remember
damn, we're going to do it again. We got to restack the hair. That's
Consistency
funny.
is the key.
So you can kind of see there, we've got our tips nice and evenly aligned. All right. Go ahead and get our hair stacker out of the way here.
What size do you tie these in?
Oh, yeah. So this is a 14.
So,
But, you know, if you wanted to, you could certainly, you know, the cool thing about, you know, a lot of flies that, you know, like this that we're tying tonight, you could certainly switch the dubbing color or the thread color. This would make a mighty fine sulfur in like a uni yellow thread. You know, if you wanted to, perhaps you find like an olive 3/0 uni, and you could do like an Isonikia emerger. And the only reason I say 3/0 is you can build the taper of the, you know, up the hook shank a lot easier with a thicker thread, you know, and a bigger hook. So absolutely. The one thing, you know, that I'm always real cautious of when I'm tying a pattern like this is how much wing I'm giving myself. So you know, the unit of measurement I kind of use is I pretty much, you know, I bring my deer hair up to my hook eye, and I go from the front of the hook eye roughly to where the hook starts to curve. And that's usually my unit of measurement for how long the wing is. Hendricksons do seemingly have an unnaturally long wing compared to body length, but we want to be able to fish this on fine tippets, sometimes 6X, usually 5X. But if you got like low clear water like we've had the last couple of years on the Asabo, you know, I did have to fish a lot of 6X.
Yes.
You know, probably, you know, 5X is generally, you know, my go-to tippet strength if I am fishing the bugs made like the Hendrickson. But, you know, if you get low clear water, you know, hey man, you might have to drop down. So we're going to go ahead and get that wing measurement. I'm going to switch hands here. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to set my wing on the top of my dubbing ball there. And I'm just going to give my thread a spin here. It kind of flattened out because I was talking. I'm just going to cord that thread up and help build a little bit of strength there. All right, do a couple soft wraps over the top, and I'm just going to kind of pull my thread in a downward fashion here. Give myself 1, 2 more firm wraps over the top there, and my wing's nice and set up there. Okay?
Nice.
So we're going to kind of, you know, do this in one fell swoop here now. So I'm going to lift my deer hair, the butts of my deer hair here, kind of upward, and I'm going to sneak my thread just in front of my deer hair butts. Okay, so now we're kind of at that time, and this is kind of, you know, Ed, I know, notice how what I thought was really unique about how Ed ties his tilt wings, he likes to set his hackle first. You know, this is just how I do it, and it seems to work pretty good for me. But we'll kind of give you some hackle ideas. You know, one thing I want to mention to anglers, you know, don't get too hyper fixated on your color of hackle. I mean, certainly if we're tying a Hendrickson and maybe we're using like a golden straw, you know, hackle, yellow and black grizzly, for example, that's going to be unnatural and not make much sense.
Right.
But, you know, if we're kind of staying in the dun hues or the grizzly hues or the grizzly dyed tans or the light duns, we're pretty good, you know, on the Hendricksons. Their legs are, you know, if the hackle were to be representative of the legs, you know, they are sort of that dunnish color. So I'm going to choose a Keogh's grizzly dyed tan, you know, for the hackle on this. But if you wanted to, you know, and this is a fairly inexpensive hackle too, Mets, you could do like a Mets dun, a light blue dun or a dark dun. That would be certainly fine too. I noticed you guys had some of the whiting 100 packs on your wall in grizzly, and perhaps there were some Mets dun packages too.
Yeah.
Those are really great tire packs. You know, if you're somebody who just needs, you know, some hackle to tie for a season, or you're just getting into it, come to a place like the Northern Angler and you know, ask for some help with hackle. They'll be, you know, probably really excited to talk about dry flies with you in the month of February. Oh man. Well, I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna set this wing here, guys. So like I said, I'm gonna do a grizzly dyed tan here.
Sweet.
As my, or you know, set my hackle here. This is a 14 hook, as Brian asked, size 14 here. So what that means is this hackle that I selected before we turned the camera on is roughly 12, a little bit, it's a big 12, okay? So if you're tying dry flies at home, perhaps maybe you're newer to dry fly tying. If you're tying anything parachute style, if you're tying on a size hook that is a 14, buy a size 12, okay? Always go one size up with your hackle. The reason is when you go to make that presentation to that rising fish with that beautiful fly that you tied, you don't want that fly to tip over. You want it to ride how you intended it to ride, which is wing upright. Okay, so by sizing your hackle up one size or two sizes, you're generally gonna 99% of the time have a fly that casts and lands the right way. We're trying to limit failure here. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to kind of preen off roughly, I don't know, 1/8 of an inch or so of fiber from the stem. And with the dark side of the hackle, so the shiny side of the hackle, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to take my non-dominant hand here. I'm going to kind of casually brush the butts of my deer hair back. And I'm going to set my hackle on the front side of those deer hair butts, just like so. Okay, give it 1, 2, 3, 4 wraps, kind of back towards the deer hair butts, and then go back to my dubbing, and we're going to cover up all that thread mess we kind of left there. Okay, so I'm going back into my dubbing package, which is the Microfine Calibatus dub, and we're just going to start to less is more. I grab a little bit of dubbing, create a noodle up the thread. One tip that I like to give people, and this has especially been prevalent this winter when if your house is dry, or your hands are really dry, it can be really painstakingly difficult to dub if you have dry hands. And this could be with ice dub or, microfine dub or really any of the dubbings. If it's at the end of a long day, you can go right to the brow or your nose like so. And you can kind of see just the natural oils that come off the the brow of my nose there. I can then go ahead and grab, scoop a little dubbing out of my hand, and that little bit of oil and moisture that you pulled off your nose or behind your ear will help set, I guess twist that dubbing firmer, onto your thread. So great little tip there if you got dry hands. All right, so we're going to go ahead and we're going to kind of brush our deer hair tips out of the way. We're just kind of going to get in there and give ourselves a nice little round thorax. Okay, once we've done that, we're going to go ahead and we're going to grab our non-dominant hand, which happens to be my right hand, and I'm going to lift with my left hand all my deer hair upwards, and I'm going to bring my thread behind the deer hair wing and let it hang on the hook shank nearest me, okay? And the reason I'm doing that is when I go and wrap my hackle and parachute it, I can then take my thread, which has been wrapped around the front of the hook and is resting neatly behind the deer hair tips. I can then capture my my hackle off that way and create, a nice clean tie-off point that doesn't create any unneat looking thread work, tying work. All right. So the last thing we got to do here, guys, is we're just going to, with our non-dominant hand, we're going to kind of brush our deer hair out of the way and start to kind of preen our hackle around so that we can start wrapping that up our post. So we're going to start this up the post, and we're going to casually wrap downward towards the base of the hook with our hackle. And I'm just kind of, you can see me getting in there, and I'm just kind of preening hackles out of the way so that I'm not trapping hackle. And it's okay if you do, because if you do, you can just go in there with your scissors and clean it up. Now, since this is an emerger, this is going to be a fly that I'm going to cast over rising fish. I'm not necessarily going to blind fish a fish like this. If I've got a fish up, he's softly eating, and we're watching the bugs float, and he's not eating the high riding duns, we're going to make the assumption at that point in time that we need to be fishing an emerger. Okay, so my point was I went off there. And then I lost my train of thought. My point is, we don't need to over hackle this because this isn't something we need this to, search when we need it. We're not going to be blind fishing this all day down the river. Okay.
Sure.
So I did about 3 hackle wraps here, and I'm holding this hackle now parallel to the camera. I'm going to lift my thread, and I'm going to go over top of my hackle stem here and start to go around the base of my post. I'm doing 2 wraps on top of the hackle stem, and then I'm going to lift the hackle upwards, and I'm going to go 1 wrap underneath the hackle stem, and I'm going to let it hang, rotate my vise. I'm going to come in with my shaky coffee hands. I'm going to clip out my hackle stem at this point, okay? So this guy's gone. We're just going to go through, and I'm just going to try, and if I've got any, missed hackle fibers there that are sticking out, I'm just going to kind of use my rotary function here, kind of cleanly tie this off, and I'm kind of shaking my thread through there. That way I'm not trapping anything. And at this point, we're going to jump the thread to the eye, lift our hackle up. We don't trap anything. Give ourselves a 3-4 wrap, kind of create a tiny little thread head there. Grab our whip finish tool. We're going to finish the fly. Almost finish the fly. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We'll do a six turn whip finish there on that bad boy. Cinch my knot down. Get in there, trim off the excess thread. All right, so we're left with these deer hair butts at this point in time. Now what's neat about this is we're going to go ahead and we're just going to kind of start to break apart our deer hair butts from our fine deer hair tips that are rearward facing here. We're going to begin to sort of separate those, and then we're going to sneak our scissors right down. And I'm going to have to tilt this back my way when I do this, but we're going to sneak the scissors right down to almost the top of the parachute hackle. We're going to give it a clip. So we're going to go ahead and clip that out. I've been tying a lot of streamers with brushes, and it's apparent to me that I've been maybe using these scissors and being a naughty boy and using these scissors to cut wire. I just went to go clip that deer hair, and it was like, yeah, dude, guess what? We're not gonna clip that for you. I kind of spun a little bit of that deer hair around. All right, awesome, perfect. That's, you can kind of see here where I trimmed that off. So I've got a nice clean cut, kind of hiding the deer hair butts, and I've got a nice 45-degree tilt wing on that. So
that looks fantastic.
That's our Hendrickson Tilt Wing Para Emerger there with a little bit of blang.
The Jimi Hendrickson hatch.
The dude, yeah. I lost that sticker you gave me. I just put it on my streamer box yesterday.
We'll have to give you another one.
We have a few.
Yeah,
that's fine.
So super cool fly. Super easy to easy to tie. It's not an expensive fly to tie. We're using thread for the body, a little bit of bling. Just creating the nice, a nice Hendrickson profile. Yeah, and adding a little, sexing it up a little bit with that tilt wing.
It looks fantastic. That's definitely a sneaky little pattern.
Yeah.
And I like the fact that you could use it for sulfurs. You could use it for, you could use that same style, like you said, for isonychias.
Yeah.
Anything. Betas.
Absolutely. Olives.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I've never fished out west, but I could imagine, like, those guys that maybe are fishing out west and fishing the PMDs, they're sulfurs. This would probably be a great pattern out there.
Right. I would definitely think this would be a great PMD pattern.
Yeah. And, a thing to kind of mention too, we gave a few hook options away. The clink hammer hook, the Daiichi 1167, that's a great hook to tie this on too.
That is a great hook.
Mm-hmm. So, you don't have to be, if you're going through your hooks and you want to tie something like this, I don't think you have to be super picky or super stingy. You probably have something at home that'll work. It's just a matter of, is it the right size for the bug you're trying to imitate? Our Hendrickson, Michigan, it's a size 14 hook. Females are slightly bigger. You could argue this all day, and some might call a male a size 15 hook and a female a size, 14. Some guys call the female a size 12, a size 4, whatever. They're in that 12 to 14 range. So if you've got a hook, hook size like that lying around, it'll probably